Welcome back to MyJewelryBench.com. Today we're going to finish up with this Hamilton 992. In last week's video we did the repair of the balance staff and made sure it was timed correctly. And now what we're going to do is turn it into this. We're going to go ahead and disassemble it, give it a full cleaning, make sure that everything works good, and put it back together. And make sure that the watch is ready to go up for sale. And of course, as usual, when you're getting ready to clean a watch, you have to disassemble it. I always start with the balance plate or the balance cock. I'm going to remove that first now that it's repaired and we know the watch works, so I can tear that apart. Just before I get going any further, this is probably a week or so for you guys since you've seen the first part of this video, but it's about 2 hours later after I did the repair and had dinner and came back to do the cleaning and service. So again, when you remove the balance, you're going to have to be very, very careful. That is a very delicate piece, along with the pallet bridge and the pallet fork. So we're removing the pallet bridge here, and they're just going to be very careful with it. There's 2 screws that hold the pallet bridge in place for the 992, and we're going to gently lift up on that, and then we will lift straight up on the pallet fork. Next thing I always like to do, and this is just my system, I like to take the mainspring winding gear off. That turns a normal thread, so you're going to turn it to the left to unscrew it. We'll put that aside. This is the setting wheel, so we're going to have to turn this counterclockwise. This is threaded in reverse, so just remember that. If it gives you any problems when you're working on a watch, typically they are reverse thread. Do not put a lot of pressure on it. You can break that screw. Next thing I want to do is remove the dial from the watch. So there's 2 dial screws on this particular dial, and we will take them off. Gently lift up on the dial. You can see the dial has some damage to it already, and we're going to go ahead and fix that during the, well, I'm not going to show you that I fixed it. I think I've already covered that in a previous video. If I did, I'll put a link to it up front or up in the upper corner. But you can see here we've got a nice chip at the 7 o'clock position, and I'm going to fix that so that we don't even notice that it was ever there. Next thing I'll do is take the hour wheel off and the cannon pinion and the setting wheel. I apologize for the focus. My thumb seems to be getting in the way of my new camera, and I'm still getting used to it, so there'll be some issues with overexposure in this video, guys. I apologize. I'm going to start by removing the bridge screws on the train bridge here, and we're going to remove those. The whole bridge came out one lift, which is unusual. And now we'll do the mainspring barrel bridge. There's 3 screws that hold this in place. We're going to remove those 2 screws and we'll remove the 3rd one. Again, we're being careful when we do that. We don't want to damage any of the gears. Yeah, let's put these train gears aside. Now, I didn't show you this, but on the Hamilton 992, 992B, and 4992, the first wheel is always solid gold. So we're off to cleaning now. Every part gets a bath in the ultrasonic cleaner. Let's start reassembling this. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the clutch system, and we will give that a little bit of oil now that it's cleaned and ready to go back together. Once that's seated, I can put a little bit of oil on the mainspring barrel hole, and we'll put the mainspring barrel in place. Make sure that's free. This watch did have a new mainspring in it. Here you can see I'm just putting the gears back in the train. I apologize for the overexposure there. The mainspring did have, or the mainspring barrel had a new mainspring in it. Looks like somebody was in this watch before. It was dropped, obviously, and that's what broke the balance staff. The watch was pretty dirty, though, so it looks like all they did was change the mainspring and got the watch running and probably sold it. Here you can see that solid gold wheel on the first wheel. And now I'm going to start assembling the bridges. So we're going to take the barrel bridge and put that in place. That also holds the first and second wheels. And what I like to do is just gently tighten one screw up to hold it. So I'm going to put all the screws in there and I'm going to tighten them down just ever so slightly just to hold it in place. I don't want to put any pressure on the pinions on any of those gears, but I do need some assistance in making sure that they are in place while I make sure the gears seat properly in each of the jewels. Once I know they're seated properly, I will tighten up each of the screws. Next part is the balance of the train bridge. So the second bridge here goes in effect. This holds the third wheel as well as the escapement wheel. These are typically a little harder to get lined up in the jewels, so take your time. Don't force them. Don't put any pressure on these. I'm holding it in place with my finger while I'm aligning them up in the jewels, but I'm not putting any significant amount of pressure, and I'm just testing it to see if they're a little bit loose, which they are. So I'm going to take this a little bit of a different approach. I'm going to put one of the screws in just to hold the bridge in place, but yet leave enough space where the gears are very, very loose, so I'm not putting any pressure on those pinions. Once I know the screws holding the bridge in there, I'll just go and reseat with my tweezers. I'll make sure that those two gears are seated correctly. Once they're seated correctly, I can tighten up that screw. Then I'll always give it a test just to make sure that the gears still turn freely, because we don't want to, like I said, break a pinion or crack a jewel, especially on a Hamilton. This is a railroad grade watch. Of course, it does have a Montgomery dial. I don't know the exact history of this watch. The dealer that I bought it from didn't know it either. And there you can see I just tested everything, made sure that everything's working good. And now I'm going to go put a little bit of oil at each of the pinions on both sides of the upper and lower bridge, making sure that everything is lubricated properly. And there I'm just putting a little oil on the mainspring barrel. Okay, so now put that set gear back in, and that should seat by itself. Remember that screw is threaded in reverse, so you're going to turn it counterclockwise to tighten it. So I'm going to turn it clockwise to seat it, and once it's seated, I can just turn it counterclockwise, tighten it up. Now I'll give it another test to make sure that the clutch and the set gear work good together. Once that's done, I can put the mainspring winding barrel or winding gear back in position. These are all keyed. Every single watch I've ever worked on has a keyed system like this, and you can rest assured that once you get it in the right position, it should just fall into place, especially with a 992. We'll put the screw in there to hold that winding gear back into position, and that is a standard thread, so we're going to turn it clockwise to tighten it down. Now, as you turn it, you're going to be putting pressure on the mainspring, which is going to wind the gears. Okay, I'm going to give this one more test and just make sure that everything is moving freely. And then we'll move on to the next stage, which is putting the pallet fork back in place. Again, be very, very, very careful with the pallet forks on any particular watch you're working on. And now we'll put the pallet bridge in place. And this is going to take a little time usually on these models just to get it lined up, because they do cover so much of the pallet fork up that it's a little hard to kind of get in there at an angle. Once we get that seated correctly, I can put a screw in and then just double check. I never tighten these up until I'm absolutely positive that the pinions for the pallet fork are resting correctly in the jewels and that there's no friction or no damage going to be caused. And we'll put the second screw in there. We'll tighten that down a little bit, and I will test again and again and again just to make sure that I'm not doing any damage. Now I'm going to give it a wind and put some pressure on the mainspring, and that should allow me to test the pallet fork and make sure that it does kind of torque itself over in each direction. And here's where we can make any minor adjustments that we need to with the pallet fork to get it to run correctly. The next thing I'm going to do is insert the complete balance. Now I've already gone ahead and cleaned this when I did the repair, just to make sure that it worked correctly. So we're going to get that seated in correctly, and you can see it takes right off, and that's what you're looking for. Just hold that balance cock in place so that you are not lifting up the balance wheel while you tighten that screw down. And again, we're going to go just a little bit, not too tight, and we want to make sure that we're free, and then I'm going to tighten it ever so slightly, a little bit at a time, just to make sure it seats correctly and that there's no pressure on the balance. Once we've got that done, we know we have a working watch, and that's what the goal is here. This watch is just a beautiful watch. Next thing is the underside, or under the dial. We're going to put the setting gear in place. That's to set the time. And the hour wheel, put that in place. Cannon pinion was already inserted. And now I'm going to snap in the dial and tighten up the dial feet. Again, there's 2 screws that hold this dial in place. Sometimes there's 3, depends on the dial and the condition of the watch. Now we'll put the dust ring in place. The dust ring keeps dust out of the movement if you tend to open up the back side of a watch. Although it's kind of a moot point on this since this is an open bridge watch. It's a 3/4 plate, not a full plate. And now we're going to put it back in the case. I did put a new crystal on this case. I did clean and polish the case and made sure that it was in good working condition. And I'll put the case screws in. I tend to do these one at a time. Some people like to do them both at the same time. It's up to you. Whatever works for you. This is just a really nice watch. I love the Hamilton railroad grade watches. They were very well made. Now I'm just going to go through and double check all my bridge screws and make sure that they're all nice and tight. And once I'm pretty satisfied, we'll give this a quick examination and move on to the next part. That is a beautiful watch, isn't it? Okay, so I'm going to flip this over. I did put the back cover on to keep any debris out of the watch itself. So I'm going to put the second hand in. Going to make sure that it's angled correctly, and now we'll move to the hour hand. Now I typically set these for 9 o'clock or 3 o'clock, but here you can see I'm adjusting the hour hand to point directly at the 12, and then I'll insert the minute hand. There's no incorrect or correct way to do this. Just, align the hands up correctly. If you have a watch that has a date or a day date, you do want to make sure that you've put it in the setting mode and turned it so that the day and the date flip over before you set it to midnight. Tighten up that minute hand. And we'll set the time. I don't really think it was 5 o'clock when I set this, the actual time, but I just set it to 5 o'clock. So we know it sets fine. We know it winds fine. The next part is to get the bezel, the front bezel, back on the watch. And that should finish up our reassembly. I'm going to wipe my fingerprints off, and we'll flip it over and take a good look at what's going on with this watch. I didn't tighten the case up all the way, but here you can see we've got the IWC Company 10-karat gold-filled case, and that is warranted for 25 years. I'm sure that warranty's up by now. And that is just a pretty railroad-grade watch. Now, if you notice, at the 7 o'clock position, I did fix the dial, so you can see that chip is gone. I put some dial enamel in there and cleaned it up. And there is our working Hamilton 992 railroad watch. Guys, I hope you found this video interesting. If you did, please give it a like. If you are not a subscriber, consider hitting that subscribe button. And if you want to get notifications every time I upload a new video, just hit that bell button under notifications. Thanks for watching and have a great day.